going to be doing my talk on threat hunting in your identity stack. What that actually means is how to really approach threat hunting and identity, all the way from gathering logs, collecting logs, enriching, baselining, getting to the point where you can start making kind of meaningful and effective hypotheses to kind of delineate between legit bad in your environment and nothing. So, without further ado, let's just hop into this. A little bit about myself. My name's Alex Walston. I'm a threat hunter at Red Canary. Currently act as the identity hunting domain representative. What that means is I am plugged in with the rest of our organization and ensuring that we are hunting and looking for the proper things in terms of identity within our customer environments. Started my career in banking as a security analyst, quickly moved into doing some detection engineering work, and kind of added on some adversary emulation on the back end of that to bolster my detection engineering. In doing this is kind of where I got my focus in identity as, all good? Sure. So in doing this is where I got the focus in doing identity. Sorry, man. That's you. All right. I could put it on, man. Perfect. I'll hold that. Okay. Sorry about that. So yeah, adversary emulation is really where I started seeing, hey, I really need to focus in on this identity stuff because as you are all aware, this is a kind of ever-present and ever-tested part of your security infrastructure and your attack surface. Adversaries are always going to be hitting this, and it is super important for you to start detecting on it early and fast because it's coming for you. So to display that, I really want to kind of just get and show a full picture of what an identity compromise might look like in your environment. And many of you are probably painfully aware of what this situation looks like because it's prevalent. So this is an identity compromise leading to a business email compromise. So starting on the left here, this is where a attacker gains access to an employee email account through a phishing site, which happens to be an adversary in the middle site, so AITM. So what is AITM? AITM is where an adversary sets up a site that says, hey, log in here. The user then logs in, and then that authentication is then forwarded to the legitimate party. So let's say in this case it's Microsoft. Microsoft says, all right, cool, we're going to now send back another session or another prompt here. That might be the two-factor authentication prompt. At this point in time, the attacker then is presenting that to the victim. The victim then would say, all right, this is my legit login. I'm going to hit my two-factor authentication. That is then forwarded back to Microsoft, which then in return gives the active session to not only the attacker now and the user. So at this point in time, the user is none the wiser that they just got phished, and the attacker now has an active session into their environment. So that leads us to section 2 here. So the attacker is now kind of free range in that environment. They're looking, in this case, we're talking email, right? So the attacker's looking through their sent mail, they're looking through their inbox, they're looking for kind of situations where money movement might be occurring. So in this case, let's say the user is consistently sending emails in terms of a wire transfer to a different party, let's say this XYZ domain, right? The attacker can go in and set up a malicious email inbox rule that will hide all legitimate traffic from that domain. After doing that, the attacker then can set up a lookalike domain that will then say, hey, I'm going to then insert myself into this conversation and kind of talk on the behalf of this user. Due to the kind of ongoing conversation that this user had with that given domain and that customer, they're likely going to start believing everything that is being said on that behalf, which would then lead to kind of a direct social engineering compromise. The user wires the money to the wrong account, and leading to a direct financial loss. So what a lot of people are not aware of is business email compromise is actually one of the largest financial losses in the cybersecurity realm. So according to the FBI's 2024 IC3 report, business email compromise was evaluated at $2.7 billion in reported losses, where ransomware was at 12 million. That's not to say 12 million is anything small, but that just shows kind of discrepancy in what we kind of put our eyes on as a security org. So that being said, put some effort into actually hunting in the space because it will return value. So when I say identity, what do I actually mean here? For the sake of this conversation, I mainly will be sticking to kind of cloud identity, things like Microsoft Entra ID, formerly Azure AD, Okta, Google Identity Platform. For your more kind of customer-facing apps, things like Amazon Cognito, which could be Okta in this case as well. Now, on-prem Active Directory is a giant portion of what the kind of ID domain is. But for the sake of this conversation, because of how differing the authentication and authorization protocols within on-prem Active Directory are, I'll be sticking to the kind of the cloud identity side mainly. So now that we have all that out of the way, what are attackers actually going for? Now, this is not an exhaustive list of everything they could possibly go for, but this is just kind of some highlights. And to start off, tokens. So tokens grant access to a resource, right? There's a bunch of different types of tokens. We have things like ID tokens, access tokens, refresh tokens, and inside of refresh tokens, we have like subsections of that. So family of refresh tokens, primary refresh tokens, and all of those have kind of various different ways that they fit into your application and your authentication stack and how they work. So ID tokens, these are used for authentication and contain information about a resource. Access tokens are used for authorization and are credentials used to access an application. And refresh tokens are used to get new tokens. And I mentioned those kind of subsections. Those are more kind of delegations on what these refresh tokens have ability to mint new tokens for. Another point to tokens are they all kind of have a different time to live. So if we're talking things like ID tokens and access tokens, those last around an hour typically. So if we're going to be hunting for that activity, it's going to be very kind of bang bang. Attacker did what they need to do. They get in and out, right? On the opposite side of that spectrum, we have family of refresh tokens. So those can last up to 90 days. So if you are hunting for activity with these family of refresh tokens, you're going to have to kind of zoom out and say, what does anomalous actually look like in our environment? Because we're going to be looking at how often do certain endpoints re-authenticate with these refresh tokens and renew their tokens. What's kind of the network context of this? Things of those nature are going to have to be kind of zoomed out for us to see what weird is. So next we have sessions. A session is a representation of a time-based verification of an identity within a system. When we're talking about session-based attacks, we are thinking things like session hijacking, those AITM attacks I mentioned that last slide. Think like Axios logins, if anyone has been familiar with that spread of that use of that user agent. This is a course where an attacker has both that malicious session and the user has the session as well, and they're using that malicious session for the amount of time that is alive. And then we have credentials. So this is anything the user has or knows that they're going to be putting into a portal to authenticate. Things like passwords, time-based one-time passwords, hash-based one-time passwords, secret codes, anything of the nature that is possible to be kind of phished or socially engineered out of users. So how do we catch them? We hunt. Unfortunately, there's a lot more that goes into it. So first and foremost is collection. This is the most important part of your hunting. It's not the most fun, but it is super, super important because you cannot hunt on telemetry you do not have. Now, I have, again, broken this down into a couple sections. It's not an exhaustive list of every single thing in terms of identity and cloud that you're going to need, but just some things to think on, right? So number one, we have authentication and identity provider logs. These are going to be things like Okta and Entra. These are going to really show you kind of the inner workings of how authentications take place in your environment, right? So it's going to show you the parameters in which these authentications started, the context in which they were initiated, and how do they kind of flow within each other, and if they encounter any errors or anything of that nature. This also is going to support if you kind of have a more complex identity stack of like Entra plus Okta, or if you have a Duo in the mix. You can start tracking that activity across these multiple different platforms that you have if you have all these logs ingested. The next two are going to be more cloud-centric things that are identity as a perimeter focused. So cloud platform logs like AWS CloudTrail, Google Cloud Audit, and Azure Activity Logs. These are going to show kind of the after actions that are taking place after identity compromise occurs. So imagine a situation where a AWS admin is compromised. They go in and spin up a EC2 instance that ends up being a coin miner. So without these logs, you not only would not be able to detect that after-the-fact activity easily, but it actually gives us a lot more kind of availability in how we hunt. We're not just looking anymore for just weird logins and weird authentications. We then can kind of zoom out into the attack chain and say, let's look for weird anomalous activity that these accounts do after the fact. So keep that in mind for these next two. And then we have productivity suite and SaaS applications. That's things like Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace. So this is going to be kind of for your everyday users. Think business email compromise, so like someone from accounting is compromised and they start sending out an internal phishing campaign. Data exfiltration through platforms like SharePoint and Google Drive, things of that nature. Next we have enrichment. So for the sake of this, all these logs I'm going to be showing are kind of generalized, not real logs. So they're not any particular platform, and that's on purpose. Just getting that out of the way. Okay, so we have a user login event right here. We just have an IP. Not really much you can go off here, right? If you add a couple little bits of enrichment, things like ISP, organization, you start getting a better picture. And you can add things like geolocation, city, state, country code, time zone, things of that nature. This will start giving you a better picture now of like, hey, what am I actually looking at? Now, there are a ton of different enrichment sources out there, and they're not all created equal. Some platforms have it built in, some are limited, some whatever have you. And they all are going to have kind of discrepancies in how they attribute this infrastructure and in terms of geolocation and ISP. It's important in terms of your hunting to kind of keep one as your source of truth. And that's not to say like that one you pick is the best one, but keep that one as your source of truth because you're going to drive yourself mad if you're constantly going back and forth and saying, well, this one says it's this and this one says it's this. Keep one down. When you get to the point where you're actually confirming if something is a true positive or not, that's when you can be a little bit more picky on what these are all saying and what's actually going on. But for the sake of you gathering data, keep one at the forefront. All right, next we have baselining. So there's another log here, has that enriched data. We can see this is Alex W., myself logging in from Comcast ISP. We see in the city of Orlando, Florida, and we see a user agent of a MacBook. So this is great. If you are a admin and you see this and you're like, I know my environment enough, I know this is where Alex logs in, he lives in Orlando, uses a MacBook, great, I know this is not malicious. That's awesome, that's tribal knowledge. You can't really use that effectively in a hunt, systematically in your hunt logic. So if we were to add a couple more things here. So I've added ISP count, city count, and user agent count. So what are these actually? So I'm tracking across, for the sake of this example, authentication logs over 10 days where the user has around 120 total authentication events. Now, what these counts are, these are a numerical value assigned to the amount of times that given parameter occurs within these given authentication logs. With that being said, we can start getting a more realistic view of how these authentications take place and the context in which they're taking place, and we can use that in a hunting kind of scenario and not just a quick analysis, I know this is good, I know this is bad. So we have 53, 55, and 57 here. These are around 50% of the time that this user authenticates, he's hitting these parameters, so we can probably say this is, with a good reason, this is safe. So let's look at one more log here. So we see this is AT&T from Miami and using an iPhone. So with a count of 51, 52, 54, again, this is getting close to 50% of the time this user is authenticating, they are using these parameters. So we can probably safely say that, again, this is likely just the user's mobile phone. They're using a Mac and an iPhone. You might say, oh, why are they from Miami here? And then they usually are in Orlando. If you've analyzed enough of these type of logs, you'll notice that, especially with mobile providers, that the preciseness of the geolocation tends to go out the window. So it's fairly realistic to say that an authentication from Orlando is logged as Miami when we're talking mobile providers. So again, this is likely legitimate due to those counts. So let's look at one more log. So this is going to show Alex logging in from Deutsche Telekom ISP in the city of Berlin and a user agent with a Windows device. Now, some alarms should be going off now. We see the counts of 4, 3, and 6. These are obviously anomalous. We can say with certainty that these parameters do not appear much in this user's authentication history. Now, how do we actually use that? We hypothesize and create hunts. So I promise I'm not just spewing kind of like basic hunt theory at you guys at this point. This is actually going to go somewhere. This is the Merriam-Webster definition of a hypothesis, and I really want to pay attention to that section too, which is a tentative assumption made in order to draw out and test its logical or empirical consequences. Main part here is that tentative assumption. So when you're making your hypothesis, You are going to go, read some threat intel, read some blog posts, see threats that are happening in your environment, and say, how is this going to show itself in my telemetry? How is this going to view? Do I have the telemetry for this? Then you're going to model that out. Now, you're oftentimes going to be incorrect on how you look for that the very first time. Not in terms of like the endpoint there, but you're going to be missing ways of tuning things. You're going to be missing certain fields that would be helpful in your investigations. You're going to find that out in the course of your hunt. Now, going back to that tentative assumption, it's important to have your hypothesis in front of you. So you say, hey, I'm going to really focus in on this and kind of put the edge cases to the side right now and not dwell on all these little things that might fall out of the range of what I'm actually looking for, and just go full on in on this so I can then go back and tune it later. So how does a hypothesis actually look, right? So you can do this any way. I like to do it in kind of a pseudocode logic, but you could write this out in like text block, bulleted list, whatever have you. Just get it out in front of you in any way, right? So I have two examples here, but this is going to be a suspicious login hunt for Google Workspace, and I'm just going to walk down this from top to bottom. So I'm looking for if a user logs in a 24-hour bucket over 30 days. Now, another thing I want to note here, in identity-based hunting, you're often going to see these kind of time buckets or these time frames. So unlike kind of endpoint hunting and some other more IOC-based atomic hunts, with identity hunting, you really have to say, I'm looking for a cluster of activity, a multitude of different parameters that occur in a sequence for me to know what is bad. So I'm not looking for these atomic, like if this user agent appears, if this IP appears, if this ISP appears, let me see this. I need to say, I'm looking for all these parameters over time. So 24-hour bucket over 30 days. What that means in actuality is 30 separate buckets of 24-hour logs is what I'm looking at. Then I'm going to be looking at for more than one country and more than one state, and those will both be true at the same time. And I'm going to be looking for rare login organization or rare login ISP. So again, how am I defining what is a rare login organization or rare login ISP? So this goes back to those the baselining. So having that numerical value that you have in your logs, that you're enriching your logs with, gives you the ability to, in your hunt logic, say, hey, I want to see ISPs that occur less than 10% of the time of this user's total auths. When you have that sort of data in there, you can start doing these kind of more complex hunts within your identity telemetry. So if those are both true, then you raise a hunting lead. So now what does a hunting lead? Hunting lead is a finding. This is anything that is just enough information for you to say, I'm able to go back into my source data and confirm if my finding is indeed a malicious finding or if it is not. So let's look at one more. We have a session hijacking using Okta DT hashes. So if you're not aware of what Okta DT hash is, this is a hash calculated by Okta at the time of authentication, used to kind of track a authentication from start to finish. So I'm looking for events in the last 120 minutes and looking for events that are sign-on events where the outcome is an allow or success. Then I'm going to group by DT hash and by user, and then I'm going to count distinct IP addresses and distinct user agents. Now, when does this happen in a malicious sense? So this would be like a user just had their Okta session stolen. They're logging in from, let's say, their home IP on their work laptop, and then the attacker logs in from the attacker infrastructure on a different laptop with a different user agent. So both of those, if those are true, we're wanting to see them. Lastly, we're going to have that rare login ISP to filter out a lot of the extra noise. And if those are both true, we are then going to raise that hunting lead to go back into the Okta data to look in to see if that DT hash is indeed tied to malicious activity. Okay, so I've mentioned hunt a lot, and I've been very vague about it, and I'm going to continue to be vague because, unfortunately, due to how differing everyone's kind of tech stack is, doing this is going to be vastly different, right? But I'm going to still break it down on how kind of you can do this. First and foremost, you're going to have an initial query. This is going to be something that takes your entirety of your data and brings it into a manageable subset of data. Now, you're not going to wildcard, give me everything so I can hunt on everything. You need to have a way to say, I want this large set a little bit smaller so I can actually start working with it. Next, you're going to process your data. So if you're fortunate enough to have a nice SIM like a Splunk, a Google Chronicle, a Sentinel with a really strong query language in there, you can do a lot of this data processing in the actual SIM itself. Although I'm partial to utilizing just Python and typical kind of data science tools to your advantage on this data processing side. So if you have the ability to query your data using an API, you pretty much can use Python without a doubt to do this kind of data processing, which removes kind of the limitation caps that a lot of these query languages kind of put on you. So after you enrich that or process that data, you can then finally investigate those findings, those hunting leads, going back up into your source data and confirming if those findings are legit or not. Lastly, we have tune and remediate. So this is where that tentative assumption comes back. You're going to say, okay, I have gone through, I know if I just queried or removed this one extra thing, or if I added one extra field, that would have helped me so much to delineate if this was good or bad so much quicker. This is where you go back up and actually change your hypothesis and then do the cycle over and over. In doing so, you're going to kind of make your hunt a lot tighter and get a better signal to noise ratio. So what are these results? I've broken it up to 3 sections here. First being a false positive. So this is activity that does not align with your hunt. So contrary to popular belief, your hunts actually should have 0 false positives. And a lot of people think hunting is very false positive prone. That should not be the case. If you're getting false positives, that means you are pulling down data incorrectly. Now what you should be getting is a lot of benign true positives. So this is activity that aligns with your hunt, but it's confirmed to be non-malicious. And what you do with that is you contextualize and use the data. So if you have the fortune or misfortune of managing and writing policy in your organization, do yourself a favor and kind of make your identity-based policies conducive to finding anomalies. And what I mean by that is if you can lock down VPNs to not be just any commercial VPN is available, if you're allowed to use only corporate devices, anything like that that you can get away with saying, I'm going to restrict my data to, that will help yourself in the long run when you identify these anomalies because they are going to be true anomalies and not just Jim from accounting got a NordVPN ad on YouTube and now is authenticating to whatever with some new ISP and it causing some finding in your hunt. So then we have true positives. So true positives, activity that aligns with your hunt and is confirmed to be malicious. What you do with that is you remediate. So quick example here again. So we're saying these suspicious logins to Google Workspace. So a false positive example would be a user has enrolled a new MFA device. Well, this could be an interesting event. This is not what you're hunting for. You should get that out of here. You don't want that. A benign true positive. This is anomalous user authentication, but the user is confirmed to be traveling. So going back to that example of a German login versus a Florida login. So in this case, this would likely trigger. So if I was traveling to Germany and I just logged in from Florida, that is 2 different ISPs, 2 different IP locations. It's very plausible that that could happen in a 24-hour time frame. And maybe I'm using a different device in that time frame. So that is, in fact, an anomalous travel. But if the security team then contacted my manager and said, hey, why is Alex logging in from Germany? This is anomalous. And then the manager says, oh, well, he's there for a conference right now. That would be a benign true positive. And in the future, they could then lock it down saying, hey, maybe they should be logging in from a corporate VPN from that location or maybe from a corporate-only device, things of that nature. Then we have true positives. This is activity that is, again, indeed malicious. So a user has done an anomalous authentication, and we can confirm that it is malicious. All right, so how can you get started today? So starting at the left here, collect your logs. Go in, audit all your logs, make sure you're getting the full breadth of everything you can possibly get. By default, these log sources don't give you everything. So audit those and make sure you can get everything you can possibly get in here. And then we enrich. Get that source of truth, get your enrichment source that you trust the most and stick to it and kind of add additional context to your logs so you can use that in your hunting. And then you're going to baseline. You're going to then have numerical values and have an understanding of how many times these parameters are showing up per user and per your environment so you can utilize that in your hypothesizing. So you're going to look at threat intel, you're going to look at your environment, you're going to look at the things that are hitting you. You're going to then kind of scope this out and how will this present itself? How are you going to find this in your environment? And then you're going to hunt on it. You're going to pull down the data, you're going to process it, and you're going to look at those findings to confirm if they are true, malicious, or not. And you can see I have a little arrow going in a circle here because hunting is really not a one-time and you're done activity. You could say I looked at the past 60 days, and then it happens on the 61st day. This is how the unfortunate reality of it, you just need to constantly be doing this. You need to go in cycle, and you're going to, in doing so, tighten up your hunts and make your process tighter and tighter and tighter until you're getting to the point where you're getting a really, really good signal to noise ratio on what you're actually looking for, hopefully finding bad, or I guess hopefully not finding bad, but finding the bad before it can really truly happen in your environment. So hope everyone learned something here and can take away from it. I'll be here for questions if you guys have any questions, and I think I have 2 giveaways, but thank you everyone so much for coming. I guess, does anyone, from that last slide I had, can someone name a single step in the threat hunting process for it? You said it first. You're the Wi-Fi adapter. All right, for a lockpicking set and a lockpicking guide, can someone name a single enrichment source for identity or IP related logs? Just for. That's a lot of people. Okay. All right. That backfired. Yeah, I heard that one first. Okay. All right. For the lockpicks, who was first? Here you go, man. All right. That's all I have for you guys. So thank you so much.